Welcome, everyone. My name is Tom Suter. I'm the founder of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. And welcome to our After Lunch IT webinar series. We usually do it on Thursday, but today we did it on Tuesday. It seems like by the attendance, I think everybody picked up on that. Today we're here to talk about the increased need to manage and deliver secure software delivery pipelines as development teams become more geographically dispersed, and add in the pandemic, of course. I'd like to welcome all the attendees. Special thanks to Michael Wright, Genevieve Cross, and the rest of the CloudBees team. Great partner. We love working with these guys, and just really looking forward to this discussion. This afternoon, we're going to hear from Nick Chaillan, our keynote speaker, and then we'll go into a panel discussion with a few of the panelists, followed by Q&A. We may pop in a poll question or two and then answer your questions. And to kick things off, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Nick Chaillan. He's a Chief Software Officer for the United States Air Force. Nick, we're happy to have you here. And one of the things we figured out on the prep call is Nick actually had twins just a few short weeks ago, and is balancing all that with running software development for the Air Force. Welcome, Nick.
Hey, thanks for having me. And it's fun, of course, to have twins and an 18 months running around, and that's why you use the concept of CI/CD to continuously deliver babies. You know, that's what I do. But just to share with you today, and I believe you can see my screen, we want to give you, and I'm sure a lot of the attendees have heard me speak now about this initiative and are getting tired of hearing the same French accent to explain what we're doing. So I tried to bring a few more slides that hopefully you have not seen just yet in the next couple of slides. But the point of this for me is to share with you how we brought the DoD to modern ages with Kubernetes and istio. And really the vision there is to have that ability to have Lego blocks containerized to bring capabilities, whether it's tools, development tools, databases, also mission software at scale. I create the software continuously multiple times a day as needed. And push it to all classification levels, which is pretty exciting for the DoD. The first thing we've done is we base everything on containers, and I'm going to try to explain a little bit more in detail today some of the reasons as to why we picked Kubernetes and containers, and also how we architected the team, the enterprise service team, bringing DevSecOps to the rest of DoD with two teams, Cloud One and Platform One. So we'll dig into that. But again, this is a joining initiative with DoD CIO and all the services. And this is, I guess, a great example of DoD-wide collaboration on this, particularly when it comes to the repo of containers and all the work we're doing with Platform One, which was just signed as enterprise service by Mr. DZ last week, which is exciting. And so we'll go to the next slide, just so people that are looking for content, all the memos, all the reference design, all the architecture, all the links to the source code, the repo, the containers that are signed with the DoD signature, and then, of course, all of the documentation and training we have is available on that website. And it's all public. It's all open to the world. And so anyone can go and check that out. So software.af.mil is the place to go to get more insight as far as what we're doing when it comes to DevSecOps and innovation. So why did we pick Kubernetes? There's multiple reasons, but the basic one was, we don't want to get locked into a cloud provider or platform. And Kubernetes is part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, so the Air Force became a member of the CNCF, so we can be a voting member. But also, multiple companies can then bring a compliant Kubernetes cluster to the CNCF requirements. And so you have companies like Red Hat or VMware or Oracle or Amazon Microsoft or Day2IQ and Rancher that work with us to be able to have different options. So you're not locked into one option, but if you do choose to use one, you can swap to any product and know that the same application, the same architecture will just work the same way. So you're not getting locked in. And that gives you an abstraction layer to the cloud. That gives you an abstraction layer to having the ability to deploy the software on premise, on disconnected air-gapped environment, on the jet. We have Kubernetes running on F-16 jets, for example, all that in 45 days. So pretty cool stuff that the team can demonstrate to show the value of abstraction and really making sure that the software we're building is designed to be flexible in a bunch of Lego blocks that you can swap around and replace things and try things out in a different way. They are mutable, so there's a lot of cyber benefit. This started, in fact, as a cyber initiative first. That's why we call it DevSecOps. Really, the sec piece here is the baked-in security we're bringing, and we use the concept of sidecar containers, which are a little sidecar container, like a sidecar for motorcycle, that brings the zero trust and behavior detection baked into the stack. And so we called the sidecar container security stack, SCSS, another fancy DoD acronym, to be able to bring that zero trust and behavior detection stack. And that gives us automation. Everything is in infrastructure as code and Git in the repo. We don't make changes in production. Everything is in the code, and that brings us a ton of visibility in terms of self-healing and resiliency. You can tear it back down and bring it back up with push-button deployment, and it auto-scales based on traffic, so you also save money when it comes to compute and a bunch of stuff like that. So it's pretty, I think it's pretty exciting to see that the same capabilities can be accredited DoD-wide, and my team is responsible for accrediting the containers for all of DoD. That enables teams like CloudBees and many others join the repo and provide their bits and their containers to the repo. And I believe, in fact, CloudBees was approved this week to be added to Repo 1. And like about 80 other companies that are working with us today on Repo 1, we can ingest containers from startups and commercial companies to be able to do that. And that obviously brings a ton of value. The example of a pipeline is, it tells you a lot about why containers matter, and that's just an example. We have 170 tools we're supporting, and all these can be swapped. So someone could say, hey, I want to swap GitLab for CloudBees or CloudBees for GitLab or whatever, right? And be able to pick what you want to use to get the job done. We're supporting 16 programming languages, 23 databases, AI machine learning, deep learning tool with Kubeflow, which has about 50 AI machine learning tools. And so each of these, if you had to update it as VMs and patch it and update all that stuff, would become a nightmare pretty quickly. So by having all these as containers, they self-update, self-heal, they auto-scale. So using the benefit of orchestration there to have these environments replicated on classified clouds and disconnected clouds, and making sure we can have a dedicated enclave per big program, whether it's F-35 or GBSD or Aegis in the Navy or Unified Platform in the Air Force. We have hundreds of teams using different tools with different options, and that's obviously critical for us to be able to scale and not have a massive tech debt to update all these tools, yet being able to provide flexibility and not have a one-size-fits-all when it comes to team adoption, so they get to pick the tools they want to use to get the job done based on their mission. DoD is just way too big to have only one pipeline, for example. So very important that we can swap these Lego blocks. The benefit of layers when you have Cloud One, which brings, that's our cloud office that brings Amazon and Azure, but we also have access to C2S, which is the IC cloud, and Fences, which is a SAP cloud for different classification levels. But then we bring on top of that, on any environment, whether it's cloud or on-premise or edge use cases, we can bring Platform One. And that also runs in production, right, to bring that stack and have the containers and the CI/CD pipeline running on Kubernetes, and then the service mesh. We use istio to do east and west traffic management and zero trust enforcement. And then what's left on the application layer by the team to do is very small, and inheriting a ton of 90% plus of the NIST controls at the platform layer. So very small delta left by the application teams that we can mostly automate, or at least provide access to a single sign-on stack to do CAC authentication or PIV authentication and things like that, or MFA. really the vision here was to make sure we stop building 50 million different platform teams. We don't have the talent for that. And so having a central team and unifying the talent inside the platform one and bringing the best talent across DoD to do that, so we can bring enterprise services to the program offices, the science and technology groups, the other agencies, the partner within the defense industrial base was critical. And that's what Platform One does across DoD now. You can see some of the locations we have covering a large chunk of the US. I'm sure most of you would like to go work for Tron in Hawaii, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. But that's exciting to see that we are pretty much all over the place. And then we created a bunch of services, and some are free, like the repo, and some are pay-per-use. That's how we grow and scale. It's foolish to think that we can do a free service when you have to deal with computer storage licenses and things like that. So you want to streamline access to resources and talent and services and licenses, but at the same time, you want to be able to grow. So as an enterprise service, the customers are the programs and they drive your priorities. And that was always very important for me, for Platform One, to make that happen. And so we started with Repo One, which is the source code side. It has all the ISC and the code of the containers and everything we do. That's open source. And then we have Iron Bank, which is the binary side of the compiled, signed, approved containers. And so you can go there and see the containers we have. There's a folder called open source, and that's where we have all the open source products. A lot of people ask us that question. So check out the open source folder that has a bunch of containers there that we maintain. And the next piece for us was to make sure we could provide a turnkey deployment of Kubernetes that would pass the DoD requirements and be STIG'd and secure and compliant with the CIS benchmark and a bunch of different stuff. So we're working with multiple companies. We talked about that, OpenShift and VMware and Rancher, Day2IQ and Oracle. And the goal is to be able to bring that push button deployment on any environment. Some of companies are not able to do that, and some are able to do that. So we created a matrix on the website to be able to know the state of these different products. So we help teams pick what distribution they want to use of Kubernetes, but we do have the ISC. Some of these links are private, meaning you need to ask access to get access to the code. So you can always send us an email to get access to that. We'll have the email on the last slide. That gives you a push button deployment of the stack, so you can deploy that on your environment. And the next two options are critical for success. One was the party bus, where we created a multi-tenant environment that teams can use to get access to a DevSecOps environment. And the Big Bang, that's more dedicated enclave. So teams can just have a dedicated environment. They get to pick the tools. Obviously, on the party bus, you don't get to pick the tools, and you just get what we have picked for you. But it's an easier way to get access to DevSecOps and get started, particularly for smaller teams or teams that are just getting started, versus the Big Bang is a dedicated enclave. We do the cyber ops, IT ops, and site reliability engineering, and we do the continuous support and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, what we created that's pretty exciting is the first ever cloud native access point, the CNAP. That replaces the CAP, the cloud access point. Some people on the government side, on the .gov side, would call that the tech, I guess. But we don't use any of that bottleneck stuff, and we use a cloud native way to bring zero trust and elasticity to our cyber stack. And so we build this with complete IAC, and we own the code base. The government owns the code base, but we do use commercial products, of course, to bring the cyber capabilities, including a full zero trust stack, allowing for bringing on device and accessing cloud at multiple classification levels, all with device enforcement, zero trust, and the behavior detection and centralized logging and telemetry. So there's a little diagram here if you want to check it out. All the code is also on the repo, but you need to ask for access for that. We have multiple training options. That was also critical for the success and adoption of Platform One. So we have the one day, of course, a bunch of stuff online with videos of a French guy speaking, unfortunately. So hopefully you have subtitles. And then you have 3 days, 6 weeks, 2 months, and all to an MVP with a real use case with your products. So that's always how we got to get the quick wins to the teams to justify spending time and money investing in DevSecOps, but demonstrating the return on investment. We ended up saving about 100-year planned program time over the first year of work on DevSecOps. Saving 100 years of time is obviously money, but it's also the ability to compete with other nation states and keeping pace with relevance. So that's obviously a big return on investment there. We obviously have pen test services, and we built a bunch of options to chat and have access to different tools, including a diode to push binaries and containers to the high side. We have 3 contract vehicles that have multiple companies on each vehicle with the basic ordering agreements to be able to do cloud services, tools, licenses, and services and talent. So teams can come to us and say, hey, I need licenses, I need cloud compute storage, I need people, DevSecOps engineers or site reliability engineers or whatever, and they can get all that onboarded within usually 30 days. Pretty cool stuff. That's how we really close the loop on the acquisition side as well. There's a bunch of slides. Obviously, you can go on the website and get a deeper dive on GitOps and how we architected the stack and how we did a continuous ATO, but I know I'm running out of time, so maybe I can stop here and see if are we taking any questions, Tom?
Yes, sure. We can definitely take some questions. I had a few. I know one of the, and Nick, is it okay if we share these slides with all the participants afterwards?
Oh yeah, and they're on the website anyway, so.
Okay. Well, good. We'll share them with everybody. We had some questions. One of them is, okay, I have all these different products that got to mix together. I got to work them out. How hard is it to do troubleshooting if there's an issue and the integration? And that was one of the questions that came up.
Yeah, and that's exactly why.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's exactly why you need a platform team, right? I think people always say, oh, that's a bunch of tools you put together and it's going to magically connect and do all the stuff it's supposed to do. And, oh, you're not going to have configuration issues or it's all going to magically work. For example, when we deploy a platform, we use single sign-on so you can connect, with the same credentials to all these different tools, the same identity across the entire environment. And that by itself, by the way, is a nightmare. We do have the container of Keycloak to be able to do that, by the way, on the repo. So people that want to use it, you can do that. And that's really the value that Platform brings to DoD and also to a lot of other agencies that are using the same containers from the repo. The integration is often the most complex piece. We call it configuration as code. So the entire configuration is also ending up in code on the repo. So the things will not just be a bunch of Lego blocks, but they will actually integrate and exchange information the right way, including defining a zero trust enforcement. For us, we have to whitelist traffic for container A to talk to B. So for 2 products to talk to each other, we have to whitelist that traffic. So it's certainly where the value of having a platform team, and that's why we decoupled, as you can see, the cloud office, which is dealing more with broader VM / compute storage, more basic stuff, and more advanced platform stuff to the Platform One team. Great.
Yeah, I think that is always the biggest thing is the integration. And if you can do a lot of it on the platform, that's going to save everybody a lot of time. Another question about the pandemic. It's funny you didn't mention it too much. It's a good thing that you got a lot of this up before we started the pandemic. What are some of the things that you've seen on development teams, especially for some that were co-located? Have you seen how has development been? Obviously, having a platform really helps, but what are some of the takeaways you've seen since we've been in pandemic now for almost 3 months?
Yeah, well, first, we were able to deploy the tools we needed during the pandemic in terms of collaboration tools and things like that, thanks to DevSecOps. Most of the tools we were able to deploy sometimes as fast as 28 hours between the beginning of the crisis to when it was ATO'd and up and running. That's only because of the platform team and the work we've done on the continuous ATO side. We would never have been able to do that without using a massive number of waivers and trying to go around the system. So that was a prime enabler of the teams. What's interesting, of course, is getting easy access to the tools and the collaboration tools, remove the silos and make everybody more efficient. Now, of course, there is a cyber piece there where we do have to be careful. You know, convenience comes often at the cost of security, and you do have to find the right balance there to make sure that what you're writing or what you're building is not getting into the hands of the wrong people the next day. So there is still some learning there to do, and we do have to do always better when it comes to making sure cybersecurity is not an afterthought. It's really baked into the everything we do, including at the application layer. And so that's where, you know, teams are rapidly improving by having the collaboration tools, chats, you know, videos, to collaborate. Where it's been a problem, I would say, is on the classified side, right? We can do very well all of this stuff on class and be at home and all that. But when you start touching classified environment, obviously, that's where we lose all that flexibility, and that's where everything falls apart. And I don't know yet what's going to be really the long-term vision. We do have launched device one, which is a super device to connect to secret cloud, but you could also use it for TS from home. But it's also a very early stage. We do have access to those devices, and it's part of the engagement with the chief architect, Preston Dunlap at the Air Force, and in a partnership with Cyber Command and DISA and the Air Force CIO. So there's a lot going on there to be able to get access to endpoints to access classified environment, but it's still expensive and also very limited in terms of who can get access to that.
Great. I think we could probably talk about that for a little bit longer, but we're running out of time. A couple of questions around risk management framework. Are there any self-service options for scans? And can you add a little color to the big issue in the military is automating risk management framework?
Yeah, so there's so the party bus has a bunch of scanner options. So when people get access to the party bus, they get access to a Git repo and all that, but they also get access to a bunch of cyber tools to do scanning, whether it's SonarQube, Fortify, check marks, stuff like Black Duck, Nexus Cycle, Twistlock, Encore. So we do provide those access so they can just scan things. The repo one has scanning capabilities for containers as well, and all the results are hosted there, so people can see in real time the findings of the scan results. So that's important. And the RMF process, really, at the end of the day, when you bring a real platform stack at scale and you do implement and do the NIST mapping, you realize pretty quickly if you have a service mesh and all the right tools there. And particularly when it comes to the continuous monitoring side of the house and the cyber stack we built, which is not just a development tool, it's a production workload runtime stack. That is checking a lot of the boxes. And I would say 90+% of the controls are taken care of by the service mesh and the platform layer that we showed on the slide. And then the rest of the RMF and the NIST controls are left, you know, at the application layer. And we use tools like SD elements to be able to map this automatically based on the risk posture of the application, and we create tickets into Jira and stuff like that to automate and keeping track with the delta between the application and the platform layer. And that's how we make sure that those are tackled and managed correctly at the application layer to be able to continuously pass the pipeline and be able to push to production.
Great. And one more question, and then I think that's all we have time for. Training. Well, if I'm a command, where should I get all my training? I know you highlight a little bit there with Defense Acquisition University videos. What would you do if you were them to really have a robust reskilling program?
Yeah, we are training, 100,000 people this year. So it's both, tech training, but also acquisition / program management kind of training as well. So less technical stuff, more on the culture of DevSecOps. And we're providing access to a lot of self-learning capabilities. We find that, classrooms and stuff like that is great, but there's limitation as far as how many people we can do. And with the virus anyway, it was a non-starter. So we moved a lot to virtual classrooms. And so we have engagements where we do have training options to join remotely, but we do have a ton of content. We partner with the Linux Foundation and the O'Reilly books to get access to the unlimited set of documentation in books and cloud, so you can have a sandbox to learn and not do things in a vacuum. So we try to give easy access to all that content. At the end of the day, the IT is moving so fast, and you have to continuously learn probably multiple times a year now. What used to last 5 years is now even less than a year in terms of lifespan of concepts and products in IT. It's moving so fast, it's very tough to keep up. And so you need to be able to empower people to spend that time to learn and not get behind, but they have to have the will to do what it takes to keep up. And not everyone can do that, honestly. I think it's going to really disrupt the way IT teams are structured and who wants to be in IT down the road, because things are moving at a pace that's very stressful for people, so they can keep up with that nonsense of continuous learning. But you do have to have that will if you want to remain up to date. And so that's the key enabler for us, is to provide access to those online learning platforms. So we have the digital university with Lauren Nosselberger that's providing that turnkey access to all this content.
Great. Well, fantastic. Thank you for your time, and try to get some sleep, my friend, with those twins keeping you up. Maybe take a nap or something after this. You've earned it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. Can the rest of the panelists get live with us? There you go. Okay. So we're going to do some quick introductions, and I'm going to defer my time. I would rather hear you guys all talk while everybody's coming on, but we have with us today, we've got John Sosha. I think he's coming live here with the IRS. We've got Mr. Rob Brown. Raise your hand there, Rob. There he is. Okay. Themba Hinkie in the lower left, and then Michael Wright with CloudBees. And we will go right to, how about John, you lead us off. I know you wanted to share some materials with us, so if you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what's going on in the IRS, and looking forward to hearing from you. You got your mute going, John?
Yeah, am I unmuted now?
Okay, there we go.
Yep, cool. So let me go ahead and share the screen with you real quick. And this is nothing really great. It's just a little silly pipeline I went ahead and created just so it could be running in the background.
So this is
okay.
Operational live
yeah,
stuff
but it's really not doing anything. It's just a mock-up. So anyway, it's going through a bunch of stages of a CI/CD pipeline. I'm John Sosha. I work at the IRS as I'm a tech specialist, but have the role of the Chief DevOps Technical SME. And I just want to talk a little bit about myself, DevSecOps pipelines, and what's going on at the IRS. My background goes into the late 80s, working in a data center. We were automating data center operations using, good tools like assembler language, some COBOL programs and stuff, just to automate reports and shift turnover stuff that was happening. Throughout the 90s, I was a developer, had a software company and stuff like that. My first exposure to what is kind of called modern DevOps was around 2005 or so. The agency I was contracting at asked me to automate the software compilation process. I never did it. It seemed like a waste of time. That was the easy stuff. So I just kind of avoided DevOps for a good 6 years plus. And then in 2011, was on another contract and was told that I had to automate the development and delivery work for 40 developers. And they threw something called Hudson on my desk. And within about a couple of hours, I became enamored with the tool and all the automation and great capabilities a continuous integration server brings to a software development and operations team. So at the IRS in about 2014, the DevOps landscape, from what I saw, from my limited view, was of about a few projects with a continuous integration server, and they were using that for automated builds. And there were some scripted deliveries, but not much. And then in 2014 also, we started to communicate out the concept of a shared build server. That was kind of a new concept to people. So communicating out what a shared build server can bring to like teams, and in regards to the topic of this session, for teams remote, so like they can see everything that's going on in the software development project. Communicating that out and trying to get folks to understand that was a bit of a challenge, but we got there. By 2017, we had about 6 projects that were using the shared continuous integration server. And at that time, an entire DevOps initiative was stood up at the agency. We've since onboarded roughly 40 projects, what we call end-to-end, although what's in the middle of DevOps keeps growing. But we have 40 projects that go end-to-end, from the source code check-in all the way out to delivery to production to controlled environments. The name of the tool that does the deliveries internally is named Drive. I think that's the deployment, release, integration, and visibility engine. It's won an award. It's done some great work. And these 40 projects use this mechanism. The time savings for each project is roughly about 35 hours worth of manual work, down to about 5 hours of manual work for each delivery to prod. And we're chopping away at that to get that 5 hours down to next to nothing. So we're working real hard at that. About 5 projects have been onboarded. If we onboard no more and we stay at these 40, it'll allow us to direct over 20,000 hours of work to be used more efficiently. So a little bit more current. In March 2019, ATARC invited us to share in a DevSecOps software development factories forum. Robin Moses, Amin Kazi, and myself, we all presented as panelists there. And there was another forum for containers. Eric Williams, Dave Connolly, Patrick Cunning. We presented on containers in October 2019. And out of that grew a DevSecOps working group, which I'm the chair of now, or the government chair at least. And we meet at noon 30 on Wednesdays. Our mission is to create a set of simple DevOps patterns for government agencies, just starting with DevSecOps. And then we're gonna take those patterns and apply some basic tooling to them and hopefully create some open source software that will allow government agencies just starting with DevOps to run, kind of a crude terse pipeline like the one you're seeing here, which on the screen, which is kind of crude, but it adds a lot of value. And I can get into a whole bunch of that, but I'll be done here in just a minute. On the security side, since that's what we're talking about today is security, we've moved security to the left for over 40 projects by conducting static code analysis. We captured well over 100 security vulnerabilities before we get to prod. That saved lots and lots of hours in production. If you catch something in development, it saves between 40 to 100 hours in production. So we've saved a lot of time with that. By running the static code analysis early in the software development cycle, it's provided faster feedback. Nicholas referenced some of that in his talk. It's also referenced a lot in the DevOps handbook, how to provide faster feedback. The pipeline itself we're working on has gone through its own SP 853 validation, AKA it has its ATO to operate, an authority to operate for the pipeline itself. And of course, this was a pile of paperwork. Over 45 documents had to be created to get that done. In addition to the static code analysis, where we currently are, is we're leveraging some vendor products to automatically scan not just the static source code, like the Java source code or whatever in the source code repository, but also the dependencies. So like log4j and all the jar files that a project will use to compile, all the dependencies are also now getting scanned automatically. And we're working to implement that. We've implemented it in a test mode and we're trying to roll that out. And on the static code analysis front, one of the great engineers in our pipeline scraped all the Jenkins log files for all the vulnerabilities. So we're taking that, dumping it into a spreadsheet, and creating a dashboard out of it. That's getting some enterprise visibility now too from our executives. We've also created fingerprinting and hashing capabilities so that we assure that what was checked into the repo is what was compiled, and what actually goes into that ear file or other deliverable that goes out the door at the very end. We check the hash between the beginning and the end. And we have a great changelog, the Jenkins changelog, that tracks all the changes that go on. In short, the visibility and inspection capabilities implicit in a DevSecOps pipeline should provide, in many ways, better than person-to-person collaboration. Like this pipeline with the visibility and inspection implicit in it, it does allow for teams to communicate better, even if they were person-to-person in a lot of ways. So I think that's it for me. Hopefully I addressed what you wanted me to. Thanks.
No, it was fantastic, John. Somehow your camera got unaligned. I think we're getting a picture of your ceiling or something.
Oh, nice. That's special.
We have some snarky commenters on the Q&A. They're all in good fun. So next we'll go with Rob Brown, CTO, USCIS. Rob is, we call him the Christopher Walken of the webinar series. He's been on, Christopher Walken is a great actor. He's in Apocalypse Now and lots of other movies, Pulp Fiction, notably. And he was on Saturday Night Live more than anybody else, at least for years. So Rob is back.
This watch. Sorry. Couldn't help myself. Appreciate the time and the invite again, Tom, and Mike and the rest of the crew. Much appreciated. I am a CTO over at USCIS, and we've been sort of embracing DevSecOps in the cloud and have had production workloads in the cloud since about 2014. And today we've got probably about 90% of our workload now within different CSPs or cloud service providers. Part of the backbone to enable a lot of that is, of course, DevSecOps, and on top of that is the right tooling, as well as the right process and governance standards, as well as the culture aspect. But today I would like to talk to you a little bit about sort of an approach, give you a little bit of history of where we were and where we're coming from, or where we're sort of heading towards. We essentially started back in those days with everybody just learning IAC or infrastructure as code, to trying to get a better understanding of just the right orchestration tool and what are the sort of the glue frameworks to tie in a real pipeline from just continuous integration and then ultimately to continuous delivery, let alone security. So as we've matured, we discovered that we had so many different rogue elements of, I'll just say we had like maybe 450 Jenkins environments that were up and running. We discovered that, you know, from an enterprise OIT perspective, what a colossal waste. And so started to aggregate, leveraging some of the tooling that exists today. And really part of that was the multi-tenant autonomous aspect of these tools, where we could set up specific standards and then apply levels of governance on those standards and on those tools. So we essentially have now created and built out a sort of that platform engineering team. We call it the delivery platform team that manages a lot of the tooling that we've already heard of today, as well as starts to curate and build upon some of the common building blocks that are available for all of the development that goes on at USCIS, as well as I would consider development as we've expanded our scope from just sort of a Java app to also include infrastructure and the development of infrastructure, the development of sort of RPA or bots in certain platforms, the development of machine learning and the pipelines associated with that, and using common tools that can be tied together and associated for all of those platform engineers. And part of our focus has been really developing on that user experience from those different areas and taking that sort of application delivery approach of that user experience or customer experience and putting our staff, our contractors, our Fed staff as those customers that the platform engineering team can provide or obtain requirements and user stories against. So really that has been our approach in maturing and modifying our sort of DevSecOps environment, as well as keeping it pretty corporate and lean, yet still having that innovation to expand into other areas that make sense. I would say one of our pretty interesting, which I'm happy to share with anybody, all of the code, is again, just almost a push button. Within 20 minutes, we will have the base core sort of a JavaScript or Spring Boot framework up and running for a development team to get started. We would include essentially all the unified components in that pipeline to include those deployment endpoints, which are typically in some sort of Kubernetes infrastructure. So it's moving down to that path has really enabled our teams and enabled us to, again, be more efficient and save a bunch of money, and yet still, start to build that culture. And instead of having, all of these different siloed out groups, we've now built out different communities of practice and sort of that lingua franca, so to speak. So we're all speaking in unison and identifying the same challenges and addressing them quickly.
Great. Thank you, Rob. And next up, we're going to have Themba Hinkie. And Themba, your background's the IC community, and Nick touched on that about how hard that is to service that community. What are your thoughts on that matter?
Yeah, so as an introduction, Themba Hinkie, I'm an independent consultant. My background is as a government program manager and tech advocate in the national security space. And now I kind of advise on implementing DevSecOps practices and how we really try and apply those to the intelligence community. And, some of the things that we think about, especially in the intelligence community where we have different thresholds for acceptable. Not necessarily because everyone shouldn't have good security. It's just that things are maybe just a little bit tighter. So you might say my passion project and the thing that I like to be an advocate for is really when we think about, at CIS or at IRS or even in the Air Force, especially some of the concepts that Nick is talking about around how we can leverage some of these technologies, these tools to deliver a governance value above and beyond the technical value that they deliver. By using a shared platform, you inherit so many controls. And I like to think of the same thing for tools, and especially important for the IC space is how can the tools make the burden of compliance lower? And how can we make tools the common control provider? And that's really kind of a passion area for me as we kind of look at these things. And as we look at DevSecOps, I think that you have to be forward-leaning, you have to be aggressive in these things. And that's some of the things that I've seen in the intelligence community. Early adopters of the DevSecOps concepts, really hyper-aware of the security element and how important it is to integrate in there. And I think that we've made great progress since then. So yeah, that's an introduction.
Great. And last, and certainly not least, Michael Wright, Director of Federal Sector of CloudBees. It'd be great to get your perspectives across government and even what the private industry is doing. Thank you, Michael.
Yes, thank you as well. And just wanted to start off by saying that it's an honor to be participating in this webinar with so many talented people, from Nick to Rob to Themba to Tom and Atark. It's an honor and it's a privilege. The one thing that I get to observe in my position as director of CloudBees Federal Business is I get to observe commonality across the various verticals, going from the DoD to the civilian agencies to the national security space. And one of the commonalities that I see, and it's a challenge, and we've been talking about it a little bit already. Nick brought it up in his slide. A question was specifically asked about it. And then, you know, everybody else has alluded to it, and it's this concept of the ATO, the authority to operate. And you hear a lot nowadays about the continuous ATO. And the importance behind this is really coming down to meeting the needs of government, meeting the needs of the mission. So whether we're talking about the Air Force and the Department of Defense and supporting the warfighters, whether we're talking about supporting civilian services that come from U.S. Customs and Immigration Services or from the Internal Revenue Service, or even the national security space, being able to field mission capability quickly to meet the needs of the mission users, in my opinion, is really why we do these things with DevOps and DevSecOps. And that ATO process, that authority to operate, and everybody here is familiar with it. I know a lot of people in the attending are familiar with it. It can be the biggest bottleneck to actually fielding new capabilities or new releases of mission systems or applications to the end user community. So that's the one common theme that where I sit in my position, being able to look across all of our various customers that CloudBees has, and we span the entire breadth of government, not just the agencies that are being represented here, but also the FSIs, the federal systems integrators, is I see this need to address the speed at which ATOs are done. And I think that this topic of managing and securing you know, federal delivery pipelines is very pertinent, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get these capabilities out to our mission owners as quick as possible. And if we have pipeline definitions, much along the lines of what we've been hearing about from the various participants in today's webinar, then that goes to bolster and help us with the ATO process. And if you've got a DevSecOps platform that is hardened, where the underlying tools that make it up, whether it's your CI/CD tools, your testing tools, your agile project management tools, your security checking tools, your deployment tools, whatever it may be, if those tools are hardened, then that is going to support any application system that you're moving through these pipelines, and allow you to more quickly field capabilities by really shortening that ATO process and get us close to that point where we're achieving a continuous ATO. And it's important when you think about all this too, is that you need to have freedom of choice when it comes to your tooling, because, you know, tooling is not a one size fits all. If we go back to what Nick was showing us in the product stack that makes up Platform One, you notice there's a lot of products that make it up. And, you know, there's not just going to be one solution that's going to provide everything that somebody needs. So at CloudBees, we really embrace this idea of freedom of choice when it comes to tooling for DevOps and DevSecOps teams, and we believe that by providing this freedom of choice and that by, you know, hardening our underlying solutions, that we're ultimately going to meet the goals of fielding mission capabilities to the government community quicker, whether it's the DoD and Air Force, the civilian services, or the national security services.
Great, great. People do like to make a choice. They do like their choices. So getting started, first question, how would you choose your first target for DevSecOps transformation? And do you start these efforts on the CI side, release, security, ops, cross-product team? Can we add some color? And Mr. Sosha, I think your cameras needs to get realigned again. But if we can, and Rob and John, you've both been had some experience in this. Maybe you got one of the two of you could get us started.
Sure, happy to. So when we started, we really, it was sort of the maturity we were at, which was predominantly with the CI component, from the unit testing to, again, to really just the smoke testing, and then performance testing was kind of a, yeah, maybe, maybe not. Predominantly due to environmental scheduling, because we were not at a state where we could essentially do burn up, burn down of actual deployment environments, and or the environments themselves were just nothing but a bunch of snowflakes that provided sort of meaningless data. So my suggestion would be, you know, if you can, and focus efforts on, depending upon where you're at, focus on automated testing as well as automated environments. And then you can sort of meet in the middle and see what that convergence looks like. That would be my suggestion. As well as making sure the project is not like some monolithic beast. Perhaps a greenfield or a brownfield would be more appropriate from a project perspective.
Great, John.
The latter part of what I just heard, it's in alignment with the State of DevOps report, where they say to start with automated testing and the infrastructure as code, the standing up of the environments. And based on what I've seen, that would be the best way to start. Get those automated tests going, get the environment stood up, meet in the middle. That's great. And I'm talking about the DORA, the DORA State of DevOps report. It states pretty clearly what I just heard. Where I've started is on the continuous integration side. And then, you know, on the operations side, trying to get them to meet in the middle is a little bit harder than starting in the middle and working out. So I would say, I would suggest starting with what I just heard. Automated testing, lots of automated testing, and infrastructure as code. But I have to say though, as a developer, it always can't hurt to get that automated build piece going too. Get those automated compiles. That just implicitly adds value. That's it.
Yeah, I would say that almost comes naturally. You start, depending upon what tooling you've got, you'll start to realize you need to have artifact repositories, and then you can start to layer security on top of that, and that helps build your POM files or your Gradle files so you can be a much more productive and faster. And then as you get more mature in that automated testing, you'll discover that those specific, you know, especially Gradle will definitely help your life dramatically in automation and getting those tests pushed, as well as your build.
Yeah. Temba, you want to?
Yeah, I would say
Chip in?
the automated testing piece is really what I think a great spot to start. When I was a government person starting it out, we started to go after the hardest, most expensive thing, which was, it turned out, the approval of software for use in classified environments. So essentially the software supply chain process and how we bring stuff in was a huge burden. And so solving that thing centrally really required starting with kind of the end in mind, true test-driven development. And I think that, you know, as John was talking about your automated testing and some of those things, I think are a great spot to start, because you start to bring in the other equities. The problem with the DevSecOps implementation will likely not be internal. It will likely be external to the team itself. There's, you know, in a small homogeneous group, you'll be fine. As soon as you walk out and you walk into, like Michael was talking about, the continuous ATO process, I mean, that's when you meet the enemy, right? So we have to make that different. And so I think that a great place to start is in the continuous, the testing, the test-driven development, but make sure that we've got our enterprise equities, whether that be system engineering or contracting or security. Try and bring them into that test-driven development world, because that will pay the biggest dividends going forward. Because if they are not on board, it does not matter how fast you release code. That is one thing that's true at almost all of these government agencies. You can have teams with stacked up releases, and that's just really, no one benefits with stacked up releases. So I think the automated testing is a great spot to start, and really trying to involve those enterprise equities as a part of that.
Great. Michael, did you want to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. Having been in a past life a former automated testing guy myself, I would definitely agree with that. I've got the scars and bruises to attest to, bringing automated testing into the life cycle. I would kind of take it a step further too. I mean, when you think about automated testing, there's automated functional testing, automated performance testing, right? Systems integration testing, user acceptance testing. I would say that by targeting automated testing and kind of expanding it beyond the traditional testing to include security type testing, whether it's, you know, running your security scanning tools like a Checkmarx or Fortify, or your container tools like a Twistlock or an Anchor. If you start with automated testing in the traditional sense, UAT, functional performance, and you expand that to security, that's where you can really start to knock down that whole ATO process, where you start to build this body of evidence that comes about from your DevOps and your DevSecOps processes for when it does come time to go to that information assurance engineer or that authorizing official, that AO, to get the ATO. If you've got some of this automated security testing evidence that you can supply to them, it should shorten that time to get the ATO. So yeah, couldn't agree more. Automated testing, and I just expand that definition of testing to include security testing.
Great, great. I've got a question around, you know, how do you get people on board? But we actually have some poll questions. If we can ask, Alyssa, if you can pull up maybe the first couple of poll questions, I'd be interested. Got a big crowd on this webinar today, and it'd be good to get this feedback from them. Has the federal government's push toward teleworking increased the need to automate and secure software system delivery pipelines? And that's one of the questions I want to ask later, because, you know, a lot of, you know, folks were commingled in one area, and now they've got to like start working remote. So I definitely want to talk about that a little bit. So can we close that one, Alyssa? And we'll maybe push one more out. Whoa. Okay. We're at 94%. I've been doing this poll stuff for a little bit. The 94% is, wow. I guess, John, I think we're on to something now with this group. Can we ask one more question? That was actually pretty shocking. Next question. What group typically presents the biggest challenges when it comes to defining DevSecOps pipeline? Program management, development, testing, security, or operations? I have no idea what this is going to come out with, so I'm very interested to see what our participants are going to come back with. We'll give it a second. All right. Okay, can we close that one up? And the results are in. Very interesting, very interesting. Security. Security is always up there. Program management. So yeah, I mean, I think security makes sense, really, that we hear that a lot. And that's really why you need to really have a DevSecOps pipeline, and you got to be doing automated testing, I guess. Any surprises around that? Can we leave the poll up for a second? That second question? Not too much, huh? Interesting, interesting. Okay. So anyway, so let's, yeah, go ahead. Comment, Michael?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it's not too surprising, right? I mean, we've been talking about the ATO process, and the, you know, smack dab in the middle of the ATO process is the security folks.
Yes. I mean, how many times have we seen it? Like Gardner says, it takes 30, you know, it takes 30 times longer to remediate software after you've already published it. You know, if you don't do it during that time, it's going to be a lot harder to change later. Okay, this is more of an organizational human element part of it, but I like this question. How did you get your teams, GRC teams, human resources, finance, mainframe, on board with this transformation? How do you reach out? It's more of the soft skills, but it's like in any IT project, how do you get them on board? Anybody want to pipe in on there, building this consensus?
So from my perspective, Tom, again, as we became more mature and we're able to provide some commonality, that then illustrated, better quality, better velocity. And that really was stemmed in the ability to provide faster feedback to those types of teams, and showcasing some of that definitely helped, and it, provided a better level of engagement, especially when it comes to IAC or an infrastructure as code. Almost, for some groups, standing up like UAT environments also sort of helped. So again, part of it, I think a lot of it was the experience of some of those product owners. And then when it comes to results and delivery, when it comes to the real business owners and stakeholders, they started to see better quality product. Some of it was just mandated, so.
I would say that mandates help, but really you have to give people something of value, which is sort of why, as an advisor for these things, I always advocate for a governance value above and beyond technical. So I think that tackling one of the bigger challenges, every organization has different challenges. In national security, it's security. But when we look at any organization, there could be compliance of some kind. Tackling a governance problem, I think, is the biggest one, because now you can actually deliver value back. So if it is involving, think about the security process. If you can make security's life easier, then you're actually bringing something to the table. And I think that those are the best ways to really drive these things, is pick something that's an intangible that is almost impossible to do, and then use that as the carrot. In the carrot or stick world, actually try and deliver people something of value works way more times than mandates.
Great. Anybody else? Okay. This is something I always think about. We've seen this with IT modernization. So we do a lot around IT modernization. How do you integrate older technologies, mainframe? And John, I'm thinking about you guys at the IRS. How do you upgrade them and into your portfolio, and how do you manage that?
We're still working that. Most of the work we've done has been in the more modern Java JEE area. We're still working out. We have some proof of concepts where we've done some automated compilations, and we're working, the operations team is working on automating some deliveries in that space further. But we're still working that pretty heavily from the legacy side, the COBOL side specifically.
And is a follow-up with pandemic, I know the IRS had to change their tax filing date. It's like pretty massive universal change. How is that? How are things like that it just get thrust upon you? How has that been?
A lot of that is really happening outside of the DevSecOps pipeline. Most of the projects we're working with, they're coming on board. They're starting to use it. Some of the work within DevSecOps was affected by that. Yep.
Okay. Gotcha. Anybody else want to add into that? When you got these legacy technologies that you're trying to get it, they're not even in the cloud yet.
I can
Rob?
get back to that a little bit if you'd like. We spend a lot of time doing exactly that, a lot of systems legacy integration. And again, we sort of borrowed from new development into old, assigning domains. I think we talked about this previously, but doing a little bit of DDD, and to include looking at what the async and synchronous comms would be between these systems, to include providing any corruption layers where it made sense, translation layers, trying to adopt different patterns, and some new technology that could be leveraged. Sometimes you're going straight to the data source itself, as opposed to relying on the application and some of the interfaces there. That made a lot of sense. So I think with some of the newer technology and some of the newer architectural paradigms that exist today, it is a lot easier to sort of structurally layer those integrations as it had been in the past. And we at CIS actually have, it's almost been a year, probably a year and a half now, we've been totally free of mainframes. So that's been also extremely awesome. So just taking the time to get the hell off.
That isn't easy. I know Department of Labor, they got some technology modernization fund to get off the legacy mainframes. That is a monster and a bear. But once it's done, you're going to be in a lot better shape. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a thought. Yeah, Tom, I've got a thought to throw in there. You know, with the number of legacy systems that exist out there within the federal government, you know, whether or not these legacy systems are ready to take advantage of modern, you know, container-based, cloud-based architectures is always a big question. But you know, that's from a production infrastructure standpoint, right? When you talk about development infrastructure and running your DevOps and DevSecOps pipelines, I think that, you know, you can move forward with that regardless of whether or not your production applications are ready to take advantage of the latest cloud technologies. You can move your DevSecOps infrastructure onto a containers or Kubernetes based platform, and you know, that's a lot of what platform one that Nick was talking about is about. You know, that those are container based tooling that's been hardened, and you can use that container based tooling, which is a modern architecture, to run your DevSecOps platform, even though your production infrastructure and the applications riding on the production infrastructure may not be ready to take advantage of you know, the latest cloud technologies. So it can kind of be a, you know, a crawl, walk, run, you know, meaning that I've got a mainframe system. I may not be able to get off of it for a while because I've got so much logic that's tied up inside of the COBOL code, and I don't even want to try to, you know, decipher all that logic that's tied up in that COBOL code. But, you know, I want to have modern development practices, modern DevSecOps development practices, so I can, you know, start to crawl and change the way in which I do the development for that mainframe system. And then maybe one day you'll be able to modernize the mainframe. But I think that's an important distinction when you talk about legacy systems. The legacy system may not be ready to take advantage of the latest cloud technologies, but that doesn't mean you can't move your development and test infrastructure onto, you know, modern architectures.
I'd like to add in one more thing to the
Sure.
to this dialogue. And the DevSecOps pipeline that's set up at this agency, there are development teams that are working to migrate some of the assembler and COBOL like legacy code to more modern languages, and the DevSecOps pipeline is being used for that. So like to help in the modernization, specifically applying some of the strangler pattern to that work.
Great, great. Well, we're already to the overtime portion of this webinar. I just looked at my watch. I can't believe it. It just went by so fast. I hesitate to make too many predictions, but I'd love to get some where do we see the federal government in your agency and the rest of the federal government in the next 6 to 12 months? What are some of the things we're going to see in the DevOps space? And maybe John, maybe start off with you. What would you kind of see? What's the plans for the IRS in the fairly near term?
Yeah, what we're working towards is to have all of our Java projects migrated over to the CI/CD pipeline for its delivery by the end of the next fiscal year. That's a huge chunk of work. We're working on getting some containerized, some projects over to the containerized platform, and we are stepping into the cloud with a very kind of ultra modern case management initiative. So a lot of neat stuff happening.
Cool. Sounds like you got a lot of stuff. How about you, Rob?
It's sort of building upon what we already have and expanding it beyond just, again, application to focus more on really machine learning and sort of the ecosystem of deployable tools that we're using. And also to provide an element of safety and trying to figure what that really looks like as we start to build out that sort of CI/CD for ML.
Gotcha. And then, how about some trends that you think that are attainable for the next 6 to 12 months? What have you been seeing, at least,
Well,
particularly the IC?
yeah, I was
Go
gonna say
ahead.
I think the IC is significantly impacted by COVID, not necessarily in their mission functionality, but in their typical practices for what was, achievable in how they do software development. So I see a big change happening in the next 6 to 12 months around how the national security space develops software. I think there's going to be a lot of unclassified development. And a real reliance on technology, and specifically enterprise grade technology, to allow them to bring their standards to a distributed workforce. And I think that that's going to be the biggest impact that we're going to see in the national security space is a sharp increase in how they approach unclassified software development.
Great. I'm looking forward to that. And Michael, you're getting the last word here.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Yeah. So I think automation is just going to become more and more important. We've been talking about automation for a while now within the federal government when it comes to DevOps and DevSecOps. But amid the pandemic and everything we've been experiencing over the last 3 months, I just think that the need for automation is going to just bubble up even more than it has so over the past years. If you're not automating, then really how can you accomplish, meeting the mission needs for the government?
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. This has been a lot of fun, and thanks to the audience. I noticed that you really stuck around all the way to the end here. And just one note. Next week, we're going to take a break from our weekly webinars. We've got a huge event that we're doing. It's a IT virtual summit centered around the pandemic. I think we have 50 speakers, 40 plus vendors. It's in a virtual. You have virtual halls. You have virtual meetups. It's going to be massive. It's probably one of the biggest things that we ever did. And really excited about that. But anyway, thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you next week at our virtual summit.
Thank you all.
Thank you.